September 11, very important day. It's the birthday of Theodore Adorno. You thought I was going to say Twin Towers and World Trade Center, America, and so on. No, it's happy birthday to Teddy Adorno, 117 if he would have been alive. Of course, he died in 1969. So we'll read some more Adorno later. Mostly I focus on Adorno in another class, not this one. So today, critical theory, we are in lecture number 5. This is partly I will talk with you about a theorist and thinker, so we have some bit of a lecture, but then we'll read more closely some further, well, into again a bit more the Stefano Hani and Fred Moten book, Undercommons. But first I wanted to talk about new technology in education and in the way in which the university is operating for us. New tech. So the real growth and innovation areas for us in higher education are partly transforming the way in which we teach, but a lot of it is not happening only in the classroom. It's happening, a lot of it happens outside. Of course, you see in your experience as students some of the technology. And we discussed that last time. We put a whole list of things on the board, if you remember, and I put the photo on the classroom stream. Technologies like translation machines and, well, the very possibility of doing what we're doing right now is so unlike teaching was when I started that, of course, I feel like time passed. I'm getting old. Now, not only is the projector electronic, and when I started, there was nothing like that. If we wanted to show a picture in the class, I had to use a photocopier, which was fairly new then, photocopy it onto plastic, put the plastic onto a big box called a OHP, overhead projector. It was nothing like that. It was just a light box that shone a light on a mirror, which shone onto the wall. And I haven't seen one of those machines for a long time. I wish classrooms still had them, because I still have the old, what we call transparencies. They're not useful for anything else. They just take up room in boxes in my office. But now, not only are we projecting via software, PowerPoint in this case, owned by Microsoft, right? They bought it, and electronically through this machine, but I'm also, as you could see if I turn this off, we're broadcasting live on Google Classroom. So anyone can be watching. Well, not anyone, and in fact right now, no one. But I'm also recording it so that you can go back tomorrow, next week, in 5 weeks' time, and check something you missed or didn't understand, or that I said was stupid or whatever. You can go back and keep them. Previously, the lecture was a one-off. If you didn't catch it then it was gone. Now, this causes changes to the way people teach. And I think it's worth thinking about what that is doing, because you are experiencing one end of it. And a lot of teachers were formed in an earlier period where these technologies had not been, or did not exist, but they had thought and generations of people had thought about the way in which a lecture works. One person is speaking, other people are taking notes, and often they would give advice on how best to be a student in that situation. So, and I just realized when I was preparing this a few days back, that kind of advice is no longer given. I mean, it might be in a different class for you, I don't know, but you could tell me if it did happen. But I remember that my students were told that you listen, and this became a culture, a habit. And in fact, a habit that I wanted to challenge back then, that students would try and write down everything from the lecture that the lecturer said. They would always have their notebooks out, pen and paper, not electronic notebook, pen and paper, and write down the main points. And then, as the Professor Zawa Hanfi said to me, but I'm sure others have said, after the lecture, and in fact I think I remember even Heidegger said something like this, after the lecture they would take their notes at home and try to rewrite out what the lecturer had said in their own words, to have a narrative version of that story, make their own story out of it, as it was thought, a way to remember. So like I don't know what to call it, knowledge. The experience of a lecture was a one-off thing that if you wanted to retain it, you had to remember. And there were tricks or skills that would help you remember by reconstructing it for yourself and putting it in your notes. And nowadays, you see that famous academics like, I know, Michel Foucault or Jacques Derrida or Adorno, happy birthday, their lectures from the old days are being republished, sometimes from tape recordings that were made, but sometimes, especially with the older ones, from the notes that students made, from the notes made by the best students or something, or collected or kept somehow, or a call went out. You were in the class of Heidegger in 1940, whatever, do you still have your notes? Please send them. We want to publish those lectures. So that writing of notes really was a recording, a way of recording and memorizing. Now, there is a bit of a debate, not much, and not exactly in education, about how digital technologies, Facebook as a kind of diary, weblogs, vlogs, actually mean that we don't have to remember as much as we used to. And if you forget something, I'm sure you've done it, what's the name of that actress who, you look it up on Google. We don't have to remember now as much. We have delegated memory to machines. To great advantage, it must be said, but also with a limitation in terms of training our minds. We're not training ourselves to remember in the way that used to be a really big issue. Free call to Australia. Give me your phone. That joke doesn't work anymore. Okay, what else? I mean, the online library, access to materials, that has changed the way in which even research and investigation or research, searching for knowledge operates. That has changed. A big thing that we were told in the past time, which really worked well for me, was when you were looking up a book, you of course had to go to the library for that, and in the library that book was at a Dewey Decimal System classification, Mark 306.75 or something, you always should look at all the books on that shelf on either side and see what else is in that area so that you know what else is being published. And now that doesn't exist when we get our books online. There are some efforts to try and recreate that kind of online bookshelf, book forum and so on, and recommendations, and Amazon does this, right? People who looked at your book have also looked at bang, bang, bang. That helps a little bit, but it's not the same of marching through the library and looking at the shelves and things. Of course, that assumes you have a good research library. And what is a research library? Has more books for sure than what we can have now in a new university, just 20 years old. So they didn't start collecting books. In fact, this library only existed a few years, right? Our library, TDT. But a research library, like where I'm from in Melbourne, there are 5 big universities. Well, there were 5, there might be more now. There are some amalgamations. But the difference between La Trobe University, which started in the 70s, 1970s, and Melbourne University, which is more than 100 years old, could be seen in the library. The Balliol Library at Melbourne University, very dusty and old-fashioned, had a fantastic amount of books, especially going back 50, 60, 70, 100 years. And they had, the library is divided into 2 sections. One was called the undergraduate library, but was really the library of books for teaching. Textbooks and books that were referred to in the class. So in my class, for example, this class, I would say, well, the Undercommons and Spivak and Adorno, and they would go into that library. And there will be hundreds of them. But then there was the research library, a different section, a bigger section of the library, in the same classification system, but with one copy of nearly every book. The university in those days, it had some money, right? Bought every book or tried to buy every book in the social sciences, in the humanities, in fine arts, in archaeology, and so on. All right, publishing changed with digital production and just-in-time production, and a library cannot afford to do that anymore. So there's another change. I'm not saying it's worse. Another change in the way in which our memory works, our research works, and our knowledge is constructed. It's by a more, is it more random or more accidental connection, and a more algorithmic connection. The algorithms written by Google, by Facebook, by Amazon, they are doing the work that used to be done by feet walking through the library and a hand, your finger going along the spines of books to see which one you will pull out and look at. Now, I think we should recover some of those activities, but of course becoming good at doing it digitally is important too. That's a skill for students, to be able to browse what is available digitally, so you know at least what there is, so that you can make selections of what to go deeper into. Translation, instant publication. Of course, these algorithms are affected by those ranking systems that we talked about the other week. And ranking systems are partly about branding, partly about a competition where universities want to be number one and are proud of it. And those who are not number one then criticize that one that becomes number one. If you've been reading the newspapers, you see that's happening here a lot. What we call in Australia, I don't know, do you have a phrase in Vietnamese for this? Tall poppy syndrome. Do you know this? Tall poppy syndrome? Okay, in Australia, it's a kind of, in Australia, we think that we are class egalitarian. Like, we don't really have a class system like the hierarchical one in England. Of course we do, it's just based on something else. But the idea of tall poppies is that you have a field of poppies. Poppy. I need red chalk for this. A flower like this, poppy, and you put it on a badge, you wear it because in the field of Flanders in World War I, many people die, so you wear that poppy to remember, Remembrance Day, to remember those who died. It's also the flower that gives you the bulb of opium. Thuốc thin, opium, you know, you make from heroin, the drug. Affine, I can't remember anything yet. Affine, yeah. Or, I don't know if the spelling will be wrong. I think something like that. Let's say, because we have translation department and we can't remember, so we have to look. This is pathetic, but opium. All right. Opium. Okay, opium comes from this poppy. This is the flower, this is the seed, and then someone cuts, it's only small, about this big, cuts with a knife, a special knife here, and out oozes a kind of mud. And that is tukfin, opium, which is then transformed through a medical process, through a distillation process, chemical process into heroin, morphine, what else? Tramadol. Many drugs come from this. And opium is the #1 trade item for English colonialism in India, and a very big thing in French colonialism in Indochina. And Ho Chi Minh has said that this is the #1 poison introduced by the French to his country, to Vietnam, and the #1 reason for him to make the effort to go to find a way to free the country from this drug. Why are we talking about opium though? Okay. Tall poppy syndrome. Okay, so you have a field of poppies. That was a digression. Sorry, knowledge and memory. You have a field of poppies. So this plant grows into a field, and the idea of a tall poppy syndrome is if one poppy grows too high, you cut it off. Because that one, something is wrong. And so this is like a egalitarian, but also a leveling thought. You have any saying like that in Tingvet? Tall poppy syndrome? Or in England, they have something similar where someone says, too smart for their boots. Is that a phrase? I'm not sure. I think I might have that wrong. Too smart for their boots, smarty pants. And smarty pants is a way of criticizing that student who is better, who seems better than the others. You know, you all should stay the same, be the same. No one should show off their knowledge, their hard work. So we call it smarty pants. Anything yet? Anything? Okay, which of you is the best student? No one will say. Which of you do you think is the best student? And you will point that person out and say, that person is. Another way of saying it, I think in America they have this more, teacher's pet. Teacher's pet? Teacher's pet is the one that does all the work, works really hard, and wants the teacher to give them reward. You know, brings an apple. What happened to that? You used to bring an apple for the teacher or gift. I remember one of my students used to always bring, because I taught all day, that time I had 4 classes, she was in the last class. Thank you for that. She always would bring a small cake to give me sugar, energy, so that the class was good. Teacher's pet. She ended up marrying a teacher. Different story. Anyway, nowadays we are in different times. So the process of selection, the algorithm or what have you, is managed by many companies, and we should do more work, I think, to get to claim those skills for ourselves. And you can become more and more adept at using what systems are available and new systems that are coming, and even maybe innovate some yourself to develop this kind of algorithm use skill, research skill, to find more things, because you can't walk around the library in the same old way. But the structures of the university are changing as well, and one thing you don't see perhaps in the teaching side is that there is this research side of the university where there are labs and centers of research where maybe people don't teach students. They just do research, so they just concentrate on their science. Not so much in the humanities and social sciences. We do have a research center called the Global Inquiries and Social Theory Research Center. I'll talk about that. And we've got another one which will come up soon. But the people in those centers, they also teach. Well, some of them are in the center, but they can't teach because they are outside the country right now. They can't come in. But in some universities and in companies that are doing knowledge research, there are research centers and labs and things called science parks. You maybe remember from the culture course, where there's a complete disconnect from the teaching and reproduction of knowledge as we have for undergraduates and masters, and there's a focus on research for itself. And what reproduces knowledge there is changing as well. The way in which companies want to hold on to knowledge, not let that knowledge go out of the company into the library or into teaching. To keep secret their innovations is a real problem. If companies, Google or Microsoft or commercial companies in sciences or even psychological stuff, hang on to protect their knowledge because they think that's how they're going to make their money. No, that is how they're going to make their money. The openness of knowledge, the idea of knowledge is for all, breaks down. I mean, if a company is invested in its knowledge base, of course it doesn't want to give that to its competitors. And that's completely different to the principle of teaching and a university. In a university, knowledge has to be potentially accessible to all. You can't, I mean, we do have inaccessibilities. There is difficulty, and there's levels of access. Like a first year cannot really get deeply into the same kind of knowledge that a master student can, but the potential should be there. They should be able to. There shouldn't be a structural block to say, no, that knowledge is only for people employed by this company, or only for people in this research lab. Now, of course, this has real world effects. If you think just of research into COVID, if companies are looking to market the vaccine, they also want to protect what they find out, not share knowledge and information. Of course, some countries will share, right? Because the whole world is in crisis over this, and we should, in principle, the ethical and moral thing to do is to put the knowledge out publicly, like open source. But pharmaceutical companies do not practice like that. And big money is involved here. Look at how much the USA is spending on buying up the patent for different experimental medicine. You saw just 3 days ago one trial, which a lot of money had been invested in for a proprietary vaccine, was found to have very negative effects on the people who were taking it in the test. I don't know if they die or it had some negative effects, and it's been cancelled. So that investment was lost. So it's true, people say, oh, the companies have made an investment in knowledge, so they should get the profit from it. But that does not work in terms of reproduction of scientists, of knowledge, and students and teaching. If you have that principle, you cannot have universities in the old way. And not just in COVID, in everything. Because more and more parts of our lives are becoming subject to the proprietary, branded, and protected knowledge of pharmaceutical corporations or other corporations. Think of how childbirth is being affected by new technologies. Not just in vitro insemination, so that people who couldn't have children pay money to a company to get in vitro fertilization of eggs, frozen eggs, and so on, right? Which is big business, of course. But also, and not just selection of sex of the fetus and so on, but also just looking after the technologies for looking after the fetus in the process of childbirth or gestation, or bioengineering. Not manipulation of DNA yet, though it's possible. All sorts of things are being put into the private sphere, which is different to the old model of university. So the model of university is now at this cusp, at a crucial moment where some parts of the university are having to privatize as well, to become commercial. And right now in Vietnam, we see this too. Demasted, our research group, has put out a call to see which parts of the university, if any, I don't think anyone is going for this really, but some might, want to go forward into the new National Science Research Center or Research Park Science City initiative. Now, if a science city is completely commercial and interested in innovating and inventing things, we have to rethink how they will reproduce knowledge. Will those companies involved with the parts of the university that go into the science park, will they do the teaching as well? I mean, a principle of education in the old style was that you want to be taught, you students want to be taught by the people who are doing the most relevant and recent and up-to-date research. You don't want to be taught old stuff by someone who used to be doing research 30, 40 years ago or whatever. You want to be taught, you must, and you should. In order to be able to be employed, you should be taught by the people who are doing the most recent research. But in this new commercial operation of the university, we have to think through how that will happen. How will it happen when that person who is doing the most interesting research is required by their company not to tell you about the latest innovations? Because the company wants to keep them, not give it to students who might give it to another company because they're employed by some competitor. That was never a question we really had to grapple with before all of this the intrusion of corporations into knowledge. Kind of exciting times, but kind of worrying. And this biotech is one. Environment is another. What do we do about environmental issues when those that are participating in everything to do with power, to do with energy systems, but also to do with quality of life issues like atmosphere and traffic and so on, are also corporate and interested in investment? Like the vested interests in automobiles or in roadway systems. And of course there's competition. There's also vested interests in building and getting contracts for and developing railway systems. That's always been the case, actually. If you go into the history of railway systems, you see that's always been a political issue. But now new technologies to put railway systems into older cities, I mean, it's taking a long, long time here in Ho Chi Minh City, but the plan is to bring the train system underground and in the sky a bit, overland and overpass and underpass, to all parts of the city because of engineering advances. And those companies also keep their knowledge close. I mean, you must have seen the competition is between Chinese engineers for the railway system and the Japanese and the French engineers. And there are three different things, and the Vietnamese government has been trying to balance a competition between them. And right now everything is stalled because the French engineers who are coming to test the line can't get into the country. So only some of the Chinese have come and only 7 of the Japanese have come, or something like that. Everything is stalled. But the new trains are starting to arrive. I think the first train for Ho Chi Minh City comes this month or next month, arrives in Ha Long Bay it's coming from France, I think. Or I might be wrong. So environment, geopolitical issues, surveillance issues about the city, surveillance across nations, espionage. Look at all the stuff that's happening with the American election, where it said, a very funny New York Times comment just 2 days ago, it said, well, we shouldn't worry too much about the Russians because the Russians are spying on both the Republican and the Democrats. It's the Chinese we should worry about because the Chinese are only spying on the Democrats. Like they are spying in an uneven way. That's just silly, but. Now, all these changes in technology mean we also should think carefully, and we can learn something from past thinkers who have thought carefully about what it is to be given over to digital technology. And I want to introduce a thinker on this, whose name is Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger was a Nazi. And yet we still study his work. In 1933, he joined the party. Before that, in 1926, he wrote a book called Being and Time. And it was about ontology, what it is to be. So it was to think about what are things, phenomenology. I guess it's phenomenology. And this book, it's in a dialogue with a communist thinker called George Lukács. You want to get into this, you need to read them both. George Lukács' History and Class Consciousness. Now they don't refer to each other. Class. It's harder to read. They don't refer to each other, but they really are talking to each other. History and Class Consciousness is a text about the proletarian communist worldview and how that perspective of the whole, like the proletarian class will eventually destroy the class system and have a move us to communism. That's the basis of this, but it's in discussion with this philosophical book, Being and Time. So you have to read them together. But I'm focusing on this because in 1926, that's when he became famous. But then, 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany and made a call to Heidegger and asked him to become the rector, the president of University of Freiburg. And Heidegger said, yes, we think, he thought that at that stage, the Nazi Party was the embodiment of German philosophy and would move forward. Historically, it was important or something like that. After 2 years of lecturing about this and coming to class dressed in his Nazi uniform with his red banner and everything, he decided that maybe that's not correct and the Nazi Party weren't good enough for his idea of Greater Germany. And he took a more backseat role, although he did not give up being a member of the party. And very interestingly, he had a job as the postal censor. So doing censorship of letters for the Nazi Party, which is incredible because really ethically, morally, why would a scholar who's supposed to be for knowledge for all be in the business of blocking some things from going out into the press and in favor of this party? Definitely a mistake. Now, he was banned after World War II, the Nazis were defeated, and he was banned from teaching. Okay, but there are those who say that his philosophy really still has something for us. And I wanted to think about that because the main argument that says that there is still something in Heidegger, even though he was banned after the war, even though he was a Nazi, there's still something that challenges us in his thinking, is around this essay called The Question Concerning Technology. Now, this is an amazing essay to read. He wrote it in 1942, but he gave it in lectures later on, 48 and 49. It was a talk, not a lecture, a talk. He was banned from teaching. And why it's amazing is that Heidegger very carefully goes through the process of what it is to even ask a question in the right way. So he's developing the philosophical skill of questioning. I mean, that's what being and time was about as well. How do you ask the question of being? Historically, philosophers always had asked this question, what is life, or what is meaning, what is truth, or something. And Heidegger had really gone back to basics to ask this question, can we even ask the question, what? Not what is life, what is it? What is something? What is it to ask something? Now, when he comes to the question concerning technology, he goes very, very carefully into this. So the first thing is, what is technology? We need to find the right way to ask that question. He starts off by thinking, you know, you can be for or against technology. Right. We think about that in a simple, common sense way. Are you in favor of teaching that includes overhead projectors and computers and so on, or against it because you want just talking and paper and pencil? But that is a kind of ignorant way of asking the question. Now, he doesn't say the word ignorant, but I'm interpreting. Because talking and writing notes is also a technology. In fact, all of it is involved with technology. So he goes, okay, well, that doesn't help. Being for or against, that's the problem, not the question. Technology, what is technology? Where does the word come from? You experiment with that. Techne. Doing. A tool for doing things. And now, is technology just tools? Is there an inquiry into what are tools? What are notes and paper? What is language as a tool for communication? What is digital? They are all tools, right? Important, and yet not enough. It doesn't really tell us anything fundamental about technology. It doesn't distinguish between writing notes and electronic digital transmission. They somehow become the same, and that doesn't help us. But then his practice had been to understand any one thing, you have to understand its context. And it's always a series of marking differences. Right, to understand, we've done this before in class, I think. Understand what a pen is, you must know all of the different things that pen is connected to. Pen and notebook. Notebook and writing. Writing notes and lecturing. Memory, hearing, class, classroom, university, language, culture, civilization, the world, the universe, the other universes, right? Each thing is it's only a pen if you know that context. Otherwise, it's just a series of atoms put together in a certain way. I mean, there's no way to understand a thing outside of its context, is Heidegger's point. In fact, what he comes up with is the context. A word for context, I suppose, is Gestell. Not exactly context, but enframing. It's once you start to think about an object, the chalk or the pen or so on, a whole world surrounds that thing. So the whole world of teaching, this tiny little bit of chalk, just the dust really. I can break it up, I can turn it into, stamp on it, it turns into dust. This brings a whole world into being because we know that chalk is the symbol of, well, nowadays chalk is a symbol of an old-fashioned teacher talking philosophy bollocks. But chalk is a symbol of that whole world of teaching, or a notebook. And, you know, companies now, you see, go to Lotte or Fahasa, you see companies are trading on our interest in notebooks. They give us so many different kinds of notebooks to buy. They're all the same, paper and cover, but they want to market them to us. You pay a little bit more because it has a cute heart on the front. Wow. Kill me now. It brings a world. What he's saying is enframing. That chalk is enframed, is given in the world. And to understand chalk in the correct way, you have to understand how language works, right? Understand. To stand underneath. Verstehen. It stands there. The chalk stands there and brings a world into being. It's enframed by this world. Now, if you then think of technology, any piece of technology brings a whole world into being. And what world does technology bring into being? What world does the chalk bring into being? Teaching and thinking about the chalk? Or what world does the technology of the notebook commercialized in a shop for profit? Or what world does the equipping of universities with digital communication devices and live-to-air camera facility? Or in other areas, and his example is the mining industry. If you understand what is the technology in mining, right? A digger that digs the earth, removes the topsoil to try and get at gold underneath. That technology, the technology of a digger in a mine, or explosive to blow up the mountain so that you can get at the rocks, or you dig a hole and get at the rock. Mining enframes a world in which the world is thought of in a certain way. The world is thought of as, first of all, separate from us and a resource that we can simply use, dig and take and use for something else. It enframes that grasping world view. And it means that other views of the world are excluded. I don't know, sounds even impossible to think what that other view of the world might be. If we don't see the world as a resource, mining, getting gold, or technology, or metals, tungsten, or what, I can't remember the thing that we have in our phones that we have to mine, getting those resources to use for all of this, enframes the world in such a way that we can't think of an alternative way of thinking. We only see the world as a resource we can use or abuse. Those who are critical of environmentalism and so on, you're either for or against the technology. Okay, the way in which we're doing mining is bad and we should be for the environment and stop doing it and so on. You're either for or against technology. He's kind of saying, no, no, no. The real danger of technology is not being for or against it. That's a political battle. It's that we cannot even imagine what the world would be like except in this way of seeing it as a resource because of that technology. And even the other ways that I can start to imagine seem completely ridiculous and don't make sense. Gaia, or the world as a, I am in the world, we are in some kind of contextual symbiosis. Sounds like hippie stuff. To see the world is not a resource. So what this says to me is that the idea of education without the technology that we're using, it's not a question of being for or against using this digital technology instead of the old chalk and notebook. It's that what kind of world does that impose upon us? What kind of world does it enframe or enforce? One in which education is just information. One where the idea of encouraging wild, creative, imaginative leaps of excitement and enthusiasm for knowledge is not really a part of the game. What instead is considered appropriate in this world that this digital technology brings is something that you can set down, usually in point form, and you can convey it to others, and you can commercialize it and lock it up in a research center or inside a lecture or inside an article. And is that knowledge? Yes, it seems like that's what knowledge is for us, but is that the only possibility for what is knowledge? That will be the question that can come from Heidegger. And it's a question worth thinking about, a challenge. I mean, what is the outside of this digital education? Okay, I kind of already talked about this because I knew where I was heading with this slide, right? Which is the profitable end of research. These are the companies. Companies now outside of the university still have a university structure. They talk about the Google campus, right? But that's not a campus like you and I think of a campus. It's where the ideas are locked into the research center of Google or the science park. And companies want to be on the university. You know what they're doing. We'll talk about this more in a couple of weeks. The thing about that is what we're seeing. Why does a university want to come? Why is Damasted, why is the government thinking about having universities involved in science parks? It's because they are still the place where researchers are being trained. We're in a transitional process, and the sign of that transition is the formation of research centers and science parks. And so you as students have vested political interest in what happens. Not your generation, maybe. You're here for what, 4 years. Okay, so what happens during that 4 years? You see a few things, but the 20-year process, students are being transformed, and you're in the transitional phase. Every generation is, of course, because things are always changing. So what is your interest and investment in that as students? I can't say, but yeah, it's really key to remember that there could be something else or something more. Now, I'm not saying we should go back to some old style of the university, like the 1920s or the 1850s or the 1700s or whatever, you know. The further back you go, the more it looks like the church. They wear funny clothes and they talk around, you know, ideas of hermeneutics and. But when we go forward into the new digital technological research center university, we should spend time thinking what might be being excluded by doing this. What things are we also giving up that maybe we should not? Are there any things we are giving up? Okay, we'll stop for a minute. I think it's break time. Not quite now, but it will do for now. So 10 minutes, yeah, 9:44. Come back at 10:50 or so. Just a little bit after 10:50. Take a break. Thank you. Try and get your understandoscope working. And part B will be just the reading of the text, so I don't think I'm recording it. I might. We'll see how it goes. Okay. Thank you. How to stop recording. Here we go. Bye.